Today, we are sewing a wardrobe staple. We are going to sew up a t-shirt, a crew neck t-shirt. And I know that your closet right now is full of them. So let's go over how to create one. And I'm gonna give you lots of tips and tricks on sewing neckbands and hems and working with that stretchy t-shirt fabric along the way. We're gonna make this t-shirt right here, the one that I'm wearing actually. And you guys, I have been working on this t-shirt pattern for 9 months. Sounds crazy, right? But I have perfected it for all of the different sizes. This is my favorite t-shirt pattern ever. So make sure you follow along to the end because you're definitely going to learn some things. And if you're not just here for the sewing tips, you can sew along with me. You can download the pattern at sewinganastasia.com. And the pattern comes in sizes extra small through 6X. And today I'm going to be sewing up to 3X. So come on, let's make a t-shirt. So if you are sewing along with me, the first thing you need to do is download the pattern and print it out. You can print it out on your home printer or you can send it to a copy shop. I have a large format version here today that I'm working with, and you're gonna notice I only have one size on it. So when you open up the file in Adobe, you can select which sizes you want to print. You don't have to print them all. So let's cut this paper pattern out with my paper scissors, of course. All done cutting. Once you have your paper pieces cut out, you should have your back shirt, your front shirt, your sleeve, and your neckband. Now it's time to cut out our fabric. And when you're choosing a fabric for the t-shirt, I would suggest a jersey fabric, but you can choose any sort of knit fabric. It will work for you. I chose to use a variegated rib knit, so you can see the ribs in it are all different sizes here. And I'm using this really fun 7D stripe. You might think of a t-shirt as just black, white, or gray, but there are so many different fun jersey colored fabrics out there, prints, stripes, etc. that you can choose from. Now it's time to start cutting out our fabric, and I've got a tip for you so you can make the most of your fabric. You're gonna notice that the selvage is in the middle of my fabric here. I've opened up the fabric and I've created 2 folds, one on each end, because my front shirt is on fold and my back shirt is on fold. So that way I'm not cutting a giant hole in the middle of my fabric, wasting my fabric. I can cut out both of them right next to each other. Look at that. And I still have extra room here. And just make sure when you're placing the pattern that it is directly on the fold. If the pattern's hanging off, your shirt's gonna get too small. And if you've got it way back here, your shirt's gonna get too big. So make sure that fold is directly on the fold of the fabric. And always double check your grain lines. It's that line with those little arrow ends on it. Make sure it's always parallel with your selvage. And for this one, the selvage is in the middle, but it still needs to be parallel with the grain line. Now I have the t-shirt completely cut out. Let's go over the pieces. I have 2 sleeves cut out, 1 neckband on fold. We have a front bodice and a back bodice, both cut on fold. Now that we have our fabric cut out, we need to cut out and mark our notches. So if you have a notcher, grab it. Otherwise, you can use a pair of scissors. Wherever you have these little lines on the pattern, you're gonna have 2 in the back armhole, 1 in the front armhole. You are going to notch those out. So if you have the notcher, you're just going to clip it into that, and it's gonna give you a little indent in the paper there. So that way when we chalk, we have a little opening. And again, you can do this with scissors. And you're going to do that to all of the notches on your pattern. And once you have your paper notched, you're going to mark your fabric with some chalk or a fabric pen. So you're going to take your chalk and you're going to put it right where those little spots are, so that way you can see it on your fabric. And you're gonna do that to all of the spots on your fabric that have notches. Now that we have everything prepared, it's time to do some sewing. And I'm going to be serging my seams together today. And if you don't have a serger, you can use your stretch knit stitch on your sewing machine. Looks like a little lightning bolt, or you can use a very narrow zigzag. Let me show you what those look like. This here is the stretch stitch for sewing seams of stretchy fabric together. And this is the one I like to call the lightning bolt stitch because I think it looks like a little lightning bolt. You're going to want to test this on a scrap, and if it's breaking when you stretch it, you want to make your stitch length longer and then test it again until your fabric stretches nice and your stitch does not pop. And if you don't have this lightning bolt stitch, you can select your regular zigzag, and then you want to make the width really narrow. So look at how narrow that zigzag is. It's still a zigzag, but just barely. You're gonna wanna test this out on your fabric and play with the width and the length of this zigzag until your fabric isn't popping and you have a nice strong seam. But as I said, I'm going to be serging my seams together. So anytime you see me serging a seam together, If you don't have that serger, just use one of those stitches to create the seam. And the nice thing about jersey fabric is that it doesn't fray, so you don't have to worry about finishing those edges. So let's start putting this shirt together. And the first thing we're going to do is sew together the shoulders, front to back bodice. So we're going to take the t-shirts and place them right sides together. And we're going to line up these shoulders and serge them together. And as you've noticed on the pattern, the seam allowance is 3/8. So I'm just serging these 2 layers together. So let's check out our shoulders and talk about what we're doing next. So you can see we have the shoulder nice and seamed together. Now we're gonna set the sleeve into the armhole. And that's where our notches are going to come in. So I do have them marked. They're a little hard to see on the brown here. Of course, they fell into the brown area. But what we need to do is take our fabric, place it right sides together, and we're going to match up those notches. You can see those little blue spots there. Those are my marked notches. And I'm going to be clipping these layers together and just working my way around the armhole. And I'm using clips because I'm going to serge this together. You don't want to use those pins in your serger. If they get caught in that blade, it's going to destroy your serger. And if you're using a regular sewing machine, you can use clips or pins. So I always like to clip about halfway, come back to the other underarm, and start clipping from this side. And depending on the fabric you chose, sometimes it's going to stretch more than another fabric, and you might need to ease it a little bit. So if you are going to ease it, you're probably going to want to pull or stretch the armhole just a little bit to get it to fit in there. And then once we have that nice and clipped into place, we are going to sew or serge this together. So while I'm serging this together, I want to make sure my edges stay nice and lined up. And if you do need to cut off just a little bit, that's okay. But if you do cut some off, make sure it's just like 1/8 of an inch. Because you don't want to affect the size or the fit of your garment. All done with that side. And now do the same exact thing to the other side. Now that we have both of the sleeves sewn in, let's take a look at it. So we have both of our sleeves beautifully sewn in. And you can see how nice they set in. Next, we're going to sew these sides together. And when we do this, we're going to pull the sleeve straight, and we are going to sew up the side of the shirt and up the underarm of the sleeve at the same time. And the most important thing when you're doing this is lining up this underarm seam. So make sure you line up that underarm seam and put a clip there. And then you can clip up the rest of your side seam and underarm seam if you'd like. So I'm starting at the underarm of the sleeve. I'm going to work my way down to that underarm seam, just really making sure that seam here is staying nice and lined up. Then I'm just going to make sure my edges are nice and lined up and continue all the way down to the hem. And now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. This shirt is really coming together. It is looking great. Now what we need to do is finish off the edges, and we're going to start by finishing off the neck with the neckband. Speaking of finishing edges, if you're looking to improve your sewing skills, make sure you check out my online sewing classes. There's a link down below in the description. And if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you like and subscribe to Sew Anastasia. It really helps the channel out a lot. Now let's get back to finishing up this t-shirt. To start working on the neckband, we need to fold it right sides together, and we're going to sew together this short side so that way it ends up a circle of fabric. So I serged that side there together, and now we have a circle of fabric. And now we're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together. And it's always great to iron this in half as well, if your fabric will iron in half, or you could clip it in half as well. So I'm just folding it together, wrong sides together. Now that I have my circle for the neckband, you can really see how that's going to end up turning into the neckband. So getting the neckband in there perfectly can be a little challenging because the neckband is smaller than the neck hole, and you want it like that so that way it lays nice and flat to your chest. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to get that neckband in there perfectly, nice and even. So we're going to use a method called quartering. So I have my neckband folded in half where the seam is on this side here, and I want to mark directly on the other side where the other fold is. So I have my chalk marked here. And now we're going to line up that seam with the blue chalk mark. And now what we're going to do is mark the other two sides. So now we have marks evenly dispersed in 4 different spots around the neck. And now we need to do the same thing to the whole of the t-shirt. So when you do this to the t-shirt, you can't just mark the shoulder, center front, and center back because center front is deeper than center back. So you're going to start at one shoulder, and I just want you to walk this. So you are going to walk the edges, which means line the edges up. And you're gonna notice when you get over here to the other shoulder that it's not directly at the shoulder seam, it's off. So go ahead and mark that with some chalk. And now we're going to line up that chalk mark with the shoulder seam we started with. And now we can mark the ends as the other quarter points. So we've got that one there. And this one here. You could do this with a ruler as well if you want to walk a ruler around the neckline and measure it out. So now that we have the neckband quartered and the neck hole quartered, we are going to clip these two together, right sides together, making sure you line up the seam that you started with. And then all of the points you have marked. So I'm going to start with that shoulder seam, lining up the raw edges. And I'm going to clip these together. And then we need to line up the rest of the notches throughout the neck. And once you have those 4 spots clipped together, it's time to serge all 3 layers together. When I start, I want to start right by that shoulder seam so I can really make sure that it's going to line up. And remember, your neckband is a little smaller than your neck hole, so just stretch it in between the clips. This also can vary depending on the fabric you're using. So if your neckband isn't shorter than your neck hole, you really want to cut a new one and make it a little shorter. Overlap your stitches and serge off. Our neckband is on. Let's take a look at it. We have our nice knit neckband here on the opening of the neck, finishing it off beautifully. Now, the seam that's in here, you have a few different ways you can continue to finish this to make it look professional. A lot of times you're going to notice a little edge stitch right below the neckband on the shirt. So you just need to make sure that your seam allowance is pushed down towards the shirt, and you're going to do a little edge stitch on the outside of the shirt. You could also just leave it and give it a good iron. You're going to notice some shirts have no stitching there besides the serge. Or you're also going to notice that sometimes there's a stitch on the shirt and on the neckband, and if you flip it over, there's a bunch of stitches that look like a serge on top of a serge. Well, that was done with a cover stitch. So a lot of times they'll run a cover stitch over this as well. But those steps are optional. And since the fabric I'm using today is fairly thin, I'm going to skip those additional steps and just leave it with the serge neckband and just give it a good iron. We have one last step, and that is hemming the sleeve openings and the bottom of the shirt. And today I'm going to be using the cover stitch machine to finish those edges so it looks super professional, just like the shirt you find in the store. And if you don't have a cover stitch machine, you still have a few options. You can turn up the hem and you could use that lightning bolt stitch to stitch it down, or you could use a zigzag stitch or a broken zigzag stitch to hem it as well. And if you want to get extra fancy, you could use a twin needle and do a mock cover stitch. You have so many options for finishing your hems on the t-shirt if you don't have a cover stitch machine. So I'm going to turn the hem up to the inside about 3/8, and I'm going to pin it down. And I'm just going to do this all the way around the entire bottom of the shirt. You can also iron it and pin it as you go, whatever you're comfortable with. You're going to notice that I am cover stitching from the right side of the fabric, and there's no blade over here like a serger has. So that's why I can use pins, because we have no blade. So now I have it set up and I have the fabric folded under 3/8 of an inch, and we are just going to run this all the way around our hems. So with the cover stitch, I want to end a few stitches into the existing cover stitch. After that, I want to make sure my needles are in their top position. I'm going to lift up my foot. And then what I like to do is just lift up this foot a little bit, grab those two threads. We're gonna pull those two threads towards me, and then we're going to cut. And then we're gonna take our project and we're gonna pull it back. And then we have one more thread to cut. And when we do that, what this does is it takes those two top threads and it pulls them to the back. But now we can take these additional threads from before and go ahead and cut them. And now we're gonna have that beautiful cover stitch on our hem. And now we wanna do the same thing to our sleeves. We are finished. At the bottom, it looks so good. It looks like it has a little serge on the inside, and then on the outside, it has that double stitch. Such a great way to finish knits. And I also have that finish on the sleeve openings. And this pattern is unisex and comes in sizes extra small through 6X. That means there's a size for everyone. So just follow that size chart. So here's the t-shirt we made today on the dress form. Look at how good it fits. Look at the length of the shoulders. Look at the fit across the chest. This is hanging so good. And so this size here, again, is the 3X. And this is why I spent 9 months working on this t-shirt pattern, because I wanted everything to fit great on all the sizes. I wanted the drape and the hang of the fabric to be awesome, extra small through 6X. And now it's here and you can download it at sewinganastasia.com. You're gonna have so much fun sewing up t-shirts and all kinds of great fabrics for summer or winter or fall or whenever. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions on putting this t-shirt together, leave it down below in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And if you enjoyed the video today, make sure you like and subscribe to Sewing Anastasia and hit the notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you guys. And don't forget to follow me on all the social under Sewing Anastasia so that way we can stay connected and creative together. And if you want to check out what's going on in the studio, make sure you follow my Instagram stories and reels for all of that behind the scenes info with sewing classes. And speaking of sewing classes, if you're in Chicago, come on into the design studio and take some classes with me. And if you're not, you can take them online. So links for all of that are down below in the description. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.